If you had a big, awesome, polished 671 supercharger, what would you run it on? Big block? Small block? LS? As it turns out, I ran the same 671 supercharger on 6 different combinations, ranging from less than 400 horsepower all the way to nearly 1,000 horsepower. Let's check it out. In this video, I'm titling 671 versus the world. I ran the same 671 supercharger from the blower shop on 6 different engine combinations. And because these were different engine families, naturally we needed different blower kits. Those are all supplied by the guys from Speedmaster, but I ran the same blower from the blower shop on all of these combinations. We started out with a simple 190 horsepower crate 350. We also ran it on a 372 stroker, aka the Gladiator 2, owned by Westech. Then we stepped up a little further to a 383, but the 383 was actually an LS 383. Then we stepped up to the big blocks. We started out with a 454 modified. Then we stepped up to a 496, even more powerful, and then finished things off with a 540-inch power outer crate motor from the guys at Blueprint Engines. Let's check it out. In this series on the 671 supercharger versus the world, the first combination is the mildest combination. We're going to go from mild to wild. We're starting off with a bare bones, just your basic stock 350 crate motor. This is a 190 horsepower crate motor is how GM advertises it. It actually makes closer to 260 or 270 when you put a 4-barrel intake manifold on and a 4-barrel carburetor and a set of headers, obviously a distributor. It comes kind of as a long block. And this was a crate motor that we, as I said, 4-barrel intake, 4-barrel carburetor, set of long tube headers, and we put it up on the dyno and run NA. This thing made 271 horsepower. Big power, and 351 foot-pounds of torque. But here's what happened when we installed the 671 supercharger. This was a blower shop 671 supercharger, and this was a Speedmaster kit using that blower. Here's what happened when we put our blower on there with dual carburetors. Although the interesting thing is I also ran this with just one of the carburetors hooked up, and it made the same power, because it just goes to show you we weren't making very much power. It didn't need very much carburation. But here's what we happened when we put the 671 supercharger. And how much did our 671 supercharged small block make? A whopping 388 horsepower and 441 foot-pounds. And this was actually at about 9.5 or 10 pounds of boost. Now, that's not a lot of power at 10 pounds of boost, but we weren't starting with a whole bunch to begin with because this was a fairly mild combination. This would be more for the guy that's just interested in having a supercharged small block, because he's going to be driving around with a blower motor, wants the thing to drive nice, which this combination would, because it's got almost no camshaft in it. And it would drive around nice and it would look good. It just doesn't make a lot of power. So this is looks only with a blower 671. Let's get to our next combo. The next motor we applied our 671 supercharger to was much healthier than that basic like 350 crate motor. It was actually a 372-inch stroker. It was a Dart SHP short block belonging to the guys at Westech, and it's the Gladiator 2, and they call it that because it's run so many different tests, including this test on a supercharger. So the Gladiator, I'm going to go ahead and show you the specs here rather than go over all this stuff. You guys can read this, but it's a 372 SHP short block, 10 and 3/4 to 1, AFR 195 heads. Here is the camshaft that was run on it, and the lift split and the intake and all that stuff. So you guys can take a look at that and see this is a fairly healthy candidate. I mean, it's making over 500 horsepower. We only revved it to 6,500, and it'll actually go farther than that as a hydraulic roller cam. But here's what happened when we installed the same 671 supercharger on this 372, and we ran it at a couple of different boost levels. So this was at about 4 pounds and picked it up to right at 600 horsepower. We stepped up to 5.2 pounds. And then finally up to 7.3 pounds, where we're making pretty good bit of power. About 675 horsepower at 6,500. As you can see, it's still climbing. We didn't rev it any higher than that, but it would certainly continue to make power.
but it's a big step up in power, as you can see on this small block compared to running the same blower on the other small block on such a mild combination that was kind of a looks only deal. But here's the 372 with the 671. So now let's step up to a 383 LS. After running our 671 on the pair of small blocks, it's time to switch over to an LS application, and this was a little bit healthier combination. It was a 383 stroker LS, meaning we started with a 5.3 liter or a 4.8 block, doesn't matter either one. And we stuck a 4-inch stroker crank in that, also bored it out to 3905. This particular one had Wiseco forged pistons and K1 rods, and also a Speedmaster 4-inch stroker crank. It was a 4340 crank, so more than strong enough for what we were doing. It also had a set of Trick Flow Gen X 225 heads, plenty of airflow, and a healthy crane cam, 624 lift, 232, 242 degree duration, and 112 degree lobe separation angle. As you can see, a couple other good things, an ATI dampener, inch and 7/8 headers. We also had a fast LSXR intake and 102 millimeter throttle body. And when we ran this thing NA, it was already making good power. You know, it was a 383, it made good power, 548 horsepower and 503 foot-pounds of torque. So now let's take a look and see what happened after we installed our blower. And again, like the others, we ran the 671 with 2 Holley carburetors on it. So it was supplied fuel not through fuel injection, but through carburation. So here's what happened when we installed the blower. The blower was set up with pulleys to provide, this is a peak boost of about 7.3 pounds. And as you can see, the power curve is still climbing. We have a rising boost curve, so the power curve is still climbing. We could continue to rev this out. We just wanted to show that you could put an old school 671 supercharger on a more modern LS application, and it and it works just fine. If you supply boost to a good, powerful, baseline LS motor, good things happen, and that's what happened here. We made over 750 horsepower, even at just 7 pounds. So this was a good combination. It would look good driving around on the street. What's cooler than having a 671 stick out of the hood? Now let's take a look at some big block applications. The first of the trio of big blocks that we applied the 671 to was the mildest, and as I said, we're going to go from mild to wild, or at least up in displacement anyway. This was a 454, and it was a Gen 6 junkyard motor that we put ring gap in. We also installed a camshaft and a set of cylinder heads. We replaced the factory heads with a set of Speedmaster aluminum heads. And also installed, and the Speedmasters were as cast oval heads. We also installed a Comp XR271 12 cam, HR12 cam, and this was a little bit different than the one we normally installed. This was the higher lift version, which was a 591 610 lift, 224, 232 or 230 duration, and 112 degree lobe separation angle. So it had aluminum heads and a aftermarket cam in it, but the thing that happens when we put these heads on, it also lowered the compression compared to going to the factory heads, because most big blocks are going to have the 121 or so cc chambers on them, and our factory Gen 6 heads had 102 cc, so we lowered the compression quite a bit. Not always a good idea, but you get extra flow, you got to balance it out with less compression. So here's what happened when we ran this motor with a dual plane intake and the 750 carb. It produced 469 horsepower and 508 foot-pounds of torque. Here's what happened after we installed the big block kit with, and remember, this is the same 671 supercharger that we ran on all of these. So we ran it at a few different boost levels, starting from as low as 4 pounds, which pushed it up to a little under 550 horsepower. And then we went from basically 4 pounds all the way up to 9 pounds in stages. And we'll go through all of these stages here. And these are all just pulley swaps. All we're doing is changing the drive ratio basically of the supercharger relative to the motor. The final step was about 9 pounds of boost, where our combination produced 654 horsepower and 625 foot-pounds of torque. As you can see, this is kind of typical blower stuff. As we go up in boost, changing the pulleys, we go up in power, and obviously you can't go up indefinitely. Now let's take a look at a slightly larger 496. Once we stepped up to the larger big block and more efficient big block Chevy strokers, things started to get serious. This was a 496. So we can take a look at our test description here. It was a Gen 5 block. It had CP Carrillo Bullet Series rods and pistons in it. It had a scat crank in it, the 4250 stroker crank. It had my kind of go-to big block Chevy cam, that comp BR314. It had a set of Pro Max CNC. It's listed here as a 355. They were actually 340 heads, of the same heads that I ran on a 572. They work really well. You know, Milodon oil pan, Edelbrock Super Victor, and a big Dominator carburetor when we ran an NA, although we ran 2 carburetors on the 671 Supercharger. So run in this manner with a fairly mild camshaft. This combination produced 676 horsepower. Peak torque was 590 foot-pounds of torque. So here is, once again, is our 671 Supercharger. So our first pulley ratio brought actually under 4 pounds, about 3.5 pounds, where we made 809 horsepower and 685 foot-pounds of torque. But we stepped things up just a little bit, up to 6.8 psi, where this thing made over 900 horsepower. It made 928 horsepower. Peak torque checked in at 790 foot-pounds of torque. So this 496 was fairly efficient NA, which helped it make even more power at a lower boost level after we added the 671 Supercharger. Remember, none of these are intercooled, basically relying on the intercooling provided by the carburetors as they supply fuel through the blower. The charge temperature goes down. Let's take a look at our final combination, which is a 540. Our final test was on the biggest motor, although it wasn't the most powerful naturally aspirated motor. That actually belonged to the 496. This was a 540 crate motor from the guys at Blueprint Engines, and it's a low compression. It used their as cast big block Chevy aluminum head. It had the same camshaft in it, the same go-to comp cam, that 300 BR14 cam. And we ran it with a single plane intake and a Holley carburetor. We can kind of take a look here at our test description. Yeah, it was a YN Team G. Our dyno header's 950 XP carburetor. Equipped as such, this low compression 540, because it was a boost ready short block or boost ready crate motor, it produced 649 horsepower and 629 foot-pounds of torque. So here's what happened, and like the others, we ran a variety of different boost levels on this 671 Supercharger, starting at a little over 4 pounds. We were getting up close to 800 horsepower. We ran 6.1, pushing us up near 850. 7.8. Getting up near 900, and the final run at 11 pounds pushed us over 900, and that was 938 horsepower. Yeah, 938 horsepower. So you can see, just like with the others, as we go up and up in boost, we go up and up in power. The thing is, on this combination, and also on the 496, with this 671 getting near 1,000 horsepower, we're kind of getting probably near the limit of the 671. Ideally, on a motor this size, or even the 496, if we really wanted to make power, we probably should step up to an 871, which would allow us to make even more power, although the blower shop blower did very well. And as we saw, ranging from going from our stock 260 horsepower small block Chevy all the way up to this 540-inch motor, the 671 works good on all these combinations. Let's get to our conclusion.
After running our 671 Supercharger from the blower shop on 6 different engine combinations, I got one question. What would you guys run it on? What engine would you apply this 671 to, and what kind of car would you put it in? Let me know in the comments. I'm Richard Holder, guys. Thanks for watching. This was a cool deal. I really like this blower, and I like the fact that we got to run it on a bunch of different motors. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. More testing coming up.